My name's Scotty P, normally the mid-strength magician, but today it's the King of Arts, and I'm going to be taking you through a little bit about how I created this image here, and it was my take on a bit of a joke, really. I wanted to put myself in the mind of someone who isn't familiar with magic terms and come up with something that they might think of when they hear a specific magic term. And the one I chose is the crisscross force. So to a magician, crisscross force actually means something, but to someone who's not familiar with magic, it may take on a different form. What I did is I split it up into crisscross and force. I used the word force and associated it with Star Wars, and I took the words crisscross and associated it with the 90s hip-hop group. And this group were famous for wearing their clothes backwards. So the idea that I had was a Jedi who was wearing his Jedi clothes backwards. And as you can see there, I also chose a dynamic pose to put this character in. The advantage of having the robe backwards is the hood is at the front. So I thought to myself, what could I put in the hood? And I chose Baby Yoda. I roughed in a background, roughed in a character, and just sort of brainstormed some composition ideas. And this is part 1 of 3 videos because this picture actually took about 5 hours. A lot of this video is sped up and cut a bit, so you're not sitting through 5 hours of drawing. But typically my drawings start with a rough layer, a rough sketch, which I'll then turn the opacity down on and put a neat line layer over the top. So you can see my layers off to the side. On the right hand side I've got a line layer there, and then underneath it I have a color layer. That's so that the line art sits on top of the color art, and I can just color without worrying about going over the lines. I also use a Wacom Intuos draw pad and stylus for my drawing. So I choose a hard round pressure sensitive brush, and that allows me to use different pressures on the draw pad to create thicker or thinner lines. And this is just an example of how the line work is going to go over the top of that rough opacity layer underneath. And I will get rid of this. I did this video, I recorded this actual video footage. It must have been almost 6 to 8 months ago, so I'm sort of remembering what I did as I go, and I'm just commenting over it now. So things, I may be catching up and remembering things as we go, but we'll push on. So the first thing I did was I went and grabbed some reference art, and I do have a whole reference folder off to the right there. A pose reference, an Obi head reference, the full Obi body, and that was to get the clothing, and I also have a Baby Yoda one and a lightsaber handle. So this is just about getting the head in the right position. His shoulders were angled, so I wanted to angle the head a little bit. And we do the same thing as we did just before. We drop the opacity down. I will get rid of the rough layer just so I can see the head better. And then we just zoom on in and draw the head. So remembering to choose the line layer. And I do take a few goes at drawing lines sometimes, as you'll see with this eyebrow here. The first one I was happy with, but this one, for some reason, took a few goes. So what I'm going to do is, this is an example where the video will be sped up, and you'll see the line work take shape. Although I'm fairly careful with the line work here, I'm not too precious about it, because I do take some time to adjust and fix up line work later on, right before I do the colouring. This is just about blocking in those larger shapes and then adding a little bit of detail, and then I'll go through and when I do the colour, just before I do the colour, I'll go through and add a little bit more detail and neaten up those lines. But right now, well, when I was drawing this, I was probably thinking, how the hell am I going to make this work? So keen to get something on paper, and that's always the hardest part, is starting. Once you've started, it's pretty good, but just coming up with that initial idea and having some composition in your head is always the hardest part for myself, at least. Now I'm just erasing the rough layer behind it, just so I can see the head a bit clearer. Once again, it's just selecting the line layer, getting those larger blocked shapes in, and a little bit of detail. So at the end of this video, and the reason it's broken up into 3 parts is, at the end of the first part, I do what's called a fresh set of eyes, and that's just walking away from the picture for 20 minutes or half an hour and doing something else, whether it's practicing magic or watching an episode of something on Netflix, and then coming back to the picture with a fresh set of eyes. You'll see things that they seem glaringly obvious, but you couldn't see them before. It's hard to explain, but when you're in the process of doing the initial line work, or when I'm in the process of doing the initial line work, I can quite easily get too focused on the part that I'm drawing, and all peripheral vision goes out the window. So I can be drawing something and have someone missing a whole hand and then not see it till I go away and come back, and then, you know, glaringly obvious, like I said. One of those obvious things that I mentioned earlier is the sleeve that I'm drawing now. It looks way too stiff and looks more like a tree trunk. That's one of those things that I go away, come back, and then adjust. And this is part 1 of 3, this video. Part 2 is a bit, part 2 is more cleaning up the line work and putting in the background and adding a lot more detail. And then part 3 is where we get into the coloring, and I use some gradients and things like that to create some depth. Probably should have used more reference material for this particular piece, just because there's so much fabric fold involved. I really just winged it, to be honest. It was just thinking about how the fabric might fall if it's stretched and pulled in different directions, and trial and error basically. Baby Yoda reference material, just cutting out Baby Yoda and masking away all that background stuff that we don't need. And then getting him in the right place. So then do the same thing as we did before, drop the opacity, throw in some line work. And having a draw pad with a pressure sensitive setting really was helpful here for the wrinkles on his head, because the lines were too thick using full pressure. And it's just a matter of deleting the line work that should sit behind the foreground. Bringing Yoda to the front. Another good trick that people can do to see if proportions are right when drawing people and creatures is they'll flip the canvas horizontally. It just highlights anomalies a bit more. If something may look right the way it is, and then you flip the canvas horizontally and it shows where things might be disproportionate or out of alignment. Background is currently still what I consider a rough background, so we'll fix that up in part 2. Until then, I'm Scotty P, and I bloody love art.